Good morning. I'm Elaine Chapnick, President of the Larchmont Mamaroneck Local Summit, welcoming you to our May meeting. This cold, wet spring makes us grateful for the warm, dry homes most of us have. Others have not been so lucky. Whether it was due to the fall floods or the lost jobs due to the COVID crisis, many in our area lost their homes and struggle to find housing. Today, we're going to find out about the future of affordable housing in our area. I'm now going to turn the program over to Ann McAndrews, today's chair. Ann?
Good morning, and thank you for joining our discussion today entitled Seeking a Place to Call Home and How Can We Make It Happen? Today's discussion will not focus on the need for better, affordable housing for all of us, but rather we'll focus on solutions. What are the tools available to meet those needs? How can we use them? Basically, how can we make it happen? To help us find those tools and to work with them, we are fortunate to have two panelists to guide us, Rosemarie Noonan and Melissa Kaplan-Macey. Our panelists will speak for about 35 minutes, and then we'll be able to take your questions. They will be moderated by the Reverend Lisa Mason of St. John's Episcopal in Larchmont. You can ask questions by writing them out under chat or raise your hand during the question period. To begin, Rosemarie Noonan is an expert's expert. As Executive Director of the Housing Action Council, she has been perhaps the most active person in Westchester County in the field of affordable housing. She has advised state and local housing officials on designing and implementing affordable housing programs and plans. And she's fostered the creation of several local organizations, especially our own Washingtonville. The goal of these organizations is the development of housing which serves low-income families and individuals of modest means. I should also add that Rosemarie Noonan is an essential part of the Pace Law School Land Use Center as an consultant. Finally, Rose has been instrumental in the development of the 51-unit Pinebrook Commons that we have right here on Palmer Avenue in Larchmont. So, Rose, what are the nuts and bolts of getting affordable housing done?
Thank you, Ann, and thank you for that introduction. And I just want to tell you all those who are participating on this Zoom call, how pleased I am to have been invited back to the Larchmont Mamaroneck Local Summit. This group has always been, I'd say, an entity that I've talked about in other communities in terms of how you continuously identify critical issues in your community and that you're particularly working at the local level and continuing to learn and continuing to address them. So thank you again for this opportunity. I think both Melissa and I have been given quite a challenge today when I see the subheading of this meeting is how can we make it happen? I've been at this many years, as Ann has pointed out, and I wish I could come here and give the solution, and I can't. But I and many others in this county continue to plug along and continue to develop development by development. And I will continue to be a believer in its one conversation at a time and one development at a time. So with that, I'm going to quickly share a screen. Hopefully I can do this. And if not, we'll go without it. But I'm going to share my screen now. Let's see. All right, can you see it? No?
No,
Wait a minute, let's try this.
there you go.
There I go.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. As you can see, Housing Action Council has been around since '74. I am not the first executive director of it, but close to it. I'm the second. What Housing Action Council does is provide expertise and staffing, particularly to nonprofits to develop housing. So you heard Ann say that it was Housing Action Council was involved in the original creation of the Washingtonville Housing Alliance, which I'm sure very few of you remember that or think that. But we continue to try to foster nonprofit housing organizations that will address the housing needs in their communities. We also co-develop housing with for-profits. Like yourselves, we engage communities in discussions on affordable housing. We assist municipalities to create land use tools that foster housing. We have, at least until recently, we are not going to be the main organization that does this after this month, but we affirmatively market affordable housing throughout Westchester County and the surrounding counties. So we have, no, we're not talking about the needs, but we are right there on the ground with so many of people and families who apply for this greatly needed housing. And we counsel tenants and potential homeowners. I always get this question, and and those who have heard me before, I say, I hate this question. I said, can you define affordable housing? My answer back is Housing Action Council defines it as anyone who cannot afford housing in the private marketplace. And you know, because we're not talking about need, you know that there is a wide, a very broad range of people who cannot afford housing in this county and in the country. But just to give you, but we often talk about, and we hear this in communities constantly, well, we want to develop affordable housing, but maybe it's workforce housing, but not low income housing. And what is public housing? We hear those questions all the time. And when you hear that discussed, oftentimes it relates to the programs that are funding these developments that are being proposed, and they govern income levels of who can be served or who should be served. Sometimes it's working with a local zoning ordinance that requires a portion of a market rate development to be affordable. You know, in New Rochelle, you'll find that their zoning ordinance for the downtown area requires that 10% of housing in market rate developments be affordable to households whose incomes are at 80% of median or less. Those communities that have adopted the county's model inclusionary zoning ordinance talk about 60% of median. Others, if it's rental, 80% of median if it's home ownership. And then when you hear about extremely low income housing, generally it's for families and individuals whose incomes are what we say are under 30% of the Westchester County median income. So the chart in front of you now just give you a sense of what income levels we're talking about when you're hearing these various percentages of median income. Again, it's an issue that every development you go back, is it a zoning issue? Is it a funding issue? Is it a community desired issue? And so I just have up here a 3-person household. A median income as of April of this year is $124,000. Some communities promote housing to up to 120%, others at 80%, under others at 60%. And it's usually the nonprofits that make the effort and try to assemble the very important funding in order to bring the affordability of units or apartments or home ownership down to those at the 50% of median and the 30% of median. And again, usually you'll hear that the greatest need, again, I'm not supposed to be talking about need, but it is for those families and individuals who are at that lower income, lower percentage of a median income of Westchester County. Okay, so affordable, remember, you need to look at zoning, you need to look at the funding sources, you need to look at the community sentiment for what's being built to define what is affordable housing, but look at it on a development by development basis. I put public housing in there because we are gradually losing public housing in the country of what used to be called public housing, which was developed by quasi-public entities. And over the years, the funding sources for that public housing has been changed so that they no longer get in most cases, direct capital for making improvements to the property. And many public housing developments are being privatized. I'm, for example, working right now in the Greenberg Housing Authority, that they have a plan to take their units of housing and to prioritize them. Those who live in public housing, if the modernization can't be done in place, always have the right to move back if they qualify and if they're in tenants in good standing. It's not a program with a design of displacement. Okay, so how do we do the nuts and bolts perspective? Because I'm sort of the how-to person on this discussion today. I want to go into nonprofit development, which is my bailiwick, because our mission as Housing Action Council is to do. We will assist in the development of any form of affordable housing, if it makes sense. But our goal is to increase the number of housing units for low and very low income families and individuals and those with special needs. And our experience over the years show that local groups play a critical role in addressing those particular needs, because often they are not the priority for the for-profit developer. And oftentimes there's smaller developments that don't make financial sense for a for-profit developer to work in them. We always talk about a layer of capital in order to make housing happen. And you need to go through various, what we say, stacking capital in order to make the affordable housing possible. The lower the income you're going to serve, the more we have to add to the capital stack in order to make it financially feasible. To give a very recent example of trying to establish the financial feasibility of an affordable housing development sponsored by a nonprofit organization. Development happens to be in Greenberg. We have had to assemble capital, that's capital from Westchester County, from New York State, and charitable donations of $300,000 per unit in order to write the costs down to a place where it's affordable to a very low income family. So it's hard work, it takes patience, but it's often the mission of the nonprofits that drives the nonprofits, its staff and board, in order to reach those very low income families. For-profit developers play an extremely important role in creating affordable housing. They have the capital, particularly upfront capital, to pull together larger developments, both all affordable housing developments and also those that are mixed income. A percentage of the units are affordable. And over these past years, we have been in, as you all know, in a market that is spurring development. So those inclusionary zoning ordinances, which exist in quite a few communities in Westchester today, have created more affordable housing than we as nonprofits can push forward. But most of those inclusionary developments and many of the all affordable for-profit developments are geared to sort of the higher income of that affordability spectrum. For those families at 60% of the area median income, for those at 80% of the median income. So often those developments are missing addressing the needs of those that are most in crisis. For-profits and nonprofits partnering together creates great value for the nonprofit because they often don't have the capital to do these developments on their own. But nonprofits bring a critical value to the for-profits. They provide greater access to funds than a for-profit can access on their own. They bring sales tax exemption, they bring mortgage tax exemption to the development, saving hundreds of thousands of dollars in order to further establish the feasibility. And it also puts the nonprofit in a position by partnering with the developer to talk about their mission, their needs, and to secure that secure those items from the for-profit developer that they most interested in. May not be at all. We always say something works best when we know neither side is completely happy at the end. And what I've been seeing lately, which is particularly exciting, is what I refer to as municipally initiated affordable housing developments. I've seen that in Peekskill recently, in Croton, also in Irvington, and in Ossining, village of Ossining. In a couple of those cases, the municipality is putting out surplus land that they have. In one case, it's a DPW site that is way underused, and they can move the use of that property to another location. And they put out a request for proposals specifically for affordable housing, and a developer has been selected, and that development is moving forward. Croton on Hudson also made a surplus piece of property available near the Croton train station. They didn't necessarily promote developers coming in for affordable housing, but some did. And the reason that the particular developer was selected was because his proposal did provide for an affordable housing development that the village felt was responsive to the needs of their community. And in Irvington, they have recently downzoned an area, and it's actually Route 9 runs through Irvington, and have provided bonuses within their zoning in order to encourage the development of affordable housing. And because of that, there is a development in the works. It still has to go through the local approval process, but it will create an all affordable housing development in Irvington when, and I guess if it gets through the local approval process. All of this takes partnership. All of it takes funding. There is funding available at the federal, the state, and the county levels. Municipalities play a critical role in helping developers, nonprofits and for-profits address feasibility. by allowing for pilots, tax exemption. I know a difficult issue that communities and school districts face, but in a way, if you're applying for state funding, you need to demonstrate that you have municipal support, and municipal support can be provided in that way and in other ways. Okay, and I will finish up with a slide I've used in other presentations, and where I've seen such great progress in the years that I've worked on affordable housing. Affordable housing did not used to be a conversation piece. We would go to cocktail parties and not talk about it. We would not talk about it over Thanksgiving dinner. Now it is a dialogue, as you know, that's going on throughout the country. However, there are concerns. As you well know, in your own community, there continues to be great concerns, and we need to continue those conversations more than we ever have. We have many land use tools now that can be used to foster affordable housing. Many communities have incorporated them into their comprehensive plans and their zoning. We now got to use them. We got to use them more than we've been using them in the past. There's funding availability. There continues to be more funding availability. There's never enough, given the expensive nature of developing housing in our part of the country. And we got to continue to promote funding policies and programs for those that assist those with the lowest need, with the greatest needs, the lowest incomes, and those with special needs. Progress is that we see developers, from my perspective, I think they're accepting of including affordable housing within their market rate developments now. We see greater interest from the development community in Westchester. We don't necessarily see as many dedicated developers to affordable housing, and we see nonprofits struggling to develop housing as they try to put this capital stack together, and also seeing that funding priorities and funding initiatives often are often developed to address larger scale projects and to try to spread the funding as far as possible to create as many units as possible. This affects the nonprofit's ability to address those with the greater needs. And collaboration, we talk a lot about collaboration. We see it much more than we saw in the past, and we need to collaborate to address this most difficult problem, for which we have many solutions, but not one solution, but we just need to keep working on it. So with that, I will move it on to my partner, who we're collaborating with on a number of things.
Thanks, Rose. And maybe if you can.
I'm going to try to get rid of my.
Yeah, and then I'll put mine up. Thank you. And I don't know, Reverend, if you wanted to say anything intervening before I kind of jumped into my presentation.
Well, I just wanted to thank you, Rose. It was so clarifying. So many things were clarified, terms and process, reality, hope. I felt like I had just an immersion in education that I very much needed. And so thank you very, very much. And it's a great transition into what Melissa is going to add to it. So thank you.
Thank you. And let me try and share my screen here. Great. So I'm going to talk not about the mechanics, and thank you, Rose, and agreed, with what the Reverend said. The specifics of how you actually create the units and make it happen. That's really the hard work of it. And on the other side, I spend my time talking about the public policy side. So kind of laying the foundation, the groundwork, so that it's easier from the community side to do all the work that Rose does to actually create the units that people can live in communities. So I'm going to just share a little bit of my background and why I'm here talking to everybody about this today. And I'm really going to focus on what Rose talked about with respect to zoning. And, it's hard enough to finance affordable housing, but we all know that one of the biggest obstacles, and Rose touched on this, is the community opposition, or the community support is, I guess, a better way to look at it. And groups like this here today, how to create the environment and foster, that feeling of, we talk a lot about the need, and we talk about how we all agree sort of in theory about this, but when we get to the ground and try and create, identify sites and look at our zoning, that's when things get really tricky. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about my background coming to the conversation. I'm going to really focus on that aspect of this today. So I come to you sort of with two hats on. I'm Vice President for State Programs with a group called the Regional Plan Association, and we're a nonprofit group working in the tri-state region dedicated to a more economically resilient, sustainable metropolitan area with quality of life that we can all enjoy. And affordable housing is really a very important area of focus for us. I'm also a resident, so I feel a little emotional talking about this in my own community. I find it really easy to talk about this to strangers in other places where it feels more like just my job. Whereas when I talk about it in Mamaroneck and Larchmont, it is really personal because I live here and, I'm participate in this community every day, and I look around at all the opportunity and all the, the terrific quality of life that we have here. And then I also look around and see how many people are not enjoying, what my children and I get to enjoy. So really important to me to volunteer in our community and to really work on this and roll up my sleeves with groups. I see a lot of folks on the call today from the Mamaroneck Coalition for Affordable Housing, which is a terrific group. We'll talk about that a little bit more. Working with other folks on this call on a comprehensive plan for the town, which I'll also talk about more, but really, reaching out to groups like the Summit and having this conversation is really important to me on a professional level, but also it's really, really personal. And those are my kids. We're at Constitution Park at an event, and I'm just, again, so lucky to live here and get to enjoy everything that we have. So my work, though, I'm going to take it a little bit back more professionally. So Regional Plan Association, we look at the intersection of a lot of different systems and issues. So we're really well known for transportation, energy and environment, good governance, and housing and neighborhood planning. And we don't just sort of look at those in silos. We look at how all of those things work together, because when you're thinking about the future of a community or a region, you can't sort of look at things sort of town by town or issue by issue. You need to look at them all together. And a little bit kind of more background on Regional Plan Association. So we've been doing this and looking at these issues across the region for a really long time, 100 years. We're celebrating our centennial this year. And the way we do our work is we look at a long range plan for the region about once every generation. Our first plan in 1929 and our most recent plan in 2017. And we really look at the issues of the day. And in between issuing these long range plans, we work with partners on the ground like all of you on this webinar today to affect the change. And so one of the pillars of the fourth regional plan is to make the region affordable for everyone. When we went out to the community, when we did our data analysis for the fourth plan, this was an area that, as Rose mentioned, it's not just a local conversation. This is a national conversation. And in our region, especially housing is too expensive. We all know that for everyone. And so, sort of the lofty goal of making the region affordable for everyone, but what does that really mean on the ground? So I know we're not spending time on need today, but I do feel like it has to be said, just to, Rose had those really important numbers on kind of, income levels. I think it's also just important to talk a little bit about housing cost burden for a minute, which is generally, the standards, if you're spending more than 30% of your income on housing, that's too much. So your housing cost burden. And I just, pulled a few statistics from some great research that Westchester County did a few years ago, which was a housing needs assessment, which is really important because we can talk about, in theory, we all know that it's too expensive, but it's really important to ground and understand that, I just, to summarize what you can see the numbers on the slide, generally in all of our jurisdictions, at least a third of people are spending more than they can afford on their housing. So housing is just too expensive for everyone. And I also want to point out that this doesn't even capture the people who can't afford to live in our community, but are part of this community and work in the grocery stores and the banks and the teachers and fire and police and all people who aren't even captured in this number. So the number, I would argue is even higher. So there is no silver bullet solution. As Rose shared with us, there's ways to put projects together. There's ways to finance it. It's challenging, not impossible. But I would argue one of the most impossible pieces is the community opposition that happens almost every single time, probably is fair to say, that there is a proposal to build affordable housing or any housing, really. And I think part of it's for sure getting that deeply affordable housing that we need. It's also getting more housing and more types of housing in general. It's a supply and demand issue as well. Obviously, the more constrained the supply is, the more the demand is, the higher the prices are across the board. So, I'm going to really, really focus in on the land use and how we use our land as an opportunity for us all to think about what we can do as citizens to help move this forward, because we can't all be the ones behind the scenes putting the financing together, but we can all support and come out to meetings when there is a development proposed and say, yes, you know what, we need this. I support it, because we all know also that our elected officials, they're out there on the front lines, and when they're faced with community coming forward and saying, we don't like this, not in my backyard, they're responding, to the constituency. And we all know also they're not seeing the whole constituency, and getting more people engaged in this who maybe don't realize this is their issue and realizing it's everyone's issue is how we're going to make it easier for Rose and other people to actually develop the units, is by creating the support for actual projects. So again, there's no silver bullet solutions. We need more homes, and we need the zoning to allow more homes in more places, because that's the baseline. If the land is not zoned to allow for development to happen, and then that's a big hurdle to get over. So we really have to think about the land that we have and how we're going to use it. So I'm going to talk about 4 different kind of pieces to the puzzle at different scales, just to put some ideas out there. I guess some folks obviously on the webinar will be more or less familiar with these, but I'm going to talk about accessory dwelling units, middle housing, transit-oriented development, and reimagined strip commercial. And this is really important, I think, too, because we have this conversation of, well, aren't we already built out? We can't fit anything else here. So these 4 types of things I'm going to talk about will kind of, I hope, get people thinking about, when I ride around town, I think, oh, well, we could change this a little, we could change that a little. I know that's my planner brain working overdrive all the time, but I'd like for other folks to be out in the community and think, oh yeah, we have that there now, but maybe we could change it a little bit and have it be a little bit different in the future. And that might, create more opportunity, more space for more people. So I like this meme. We pass this around at RPA a lot. We actually issued a report called Be My Neighbor right around the time this image of Mr. Rogers came out. But if you look at, what I think many of us really enjoy about communities, those walkable, mixed use places that feel, vibrant, where we gather, where we enjoy being, are in large part illegal. You can't build them because we have large lot zoning in many, many places. And it's, actually to create places that have more flexibility. That's sort of not where we're at in terms of our zoning in many cases. So accessory dwelling units, Regional Plan Association, we did a report a few years ago now. We looked at the opportunity to create accessory units across the region. I know there was a big conversation over the past few months with Governor Hochul's budget, where there was a proposal to allow accessory dwelling units in all communities. And that, was met with a lot of resistance. I think also met with a lot of just lack of kind of conversation. We haven't had enough conversation, I think, about accessory dwelling units and what it means for our local community. So I'm really glad that the governor opened the conversation, and there's definitely been more discussion about this. So I'll just spend a minute or two talking about what is an accessory dwelling unit, and we can answer some questions, when we get to that part of the conversation. But I think for today, I just sort of want to share the different tools and ideas and what we could think about doing in our communities. And I'll also say that as much as I understand that there's a lot of resistance to the state coming in and saying, well, we're going to require towns to do this or that with their local zoning, I think it's also important to recognize that there are best practices and sort of a baseline for how to do these things well. And it isn't necessarily true that every town needs to kind of recreate the wheel over and over again. So I think if we can start to understand what the different tools are, whether it's accessory dwelling units or transit-oriented development, and adopt zoning to advance those things at the local level, fantastic. I think we should be doing that. To the extent that we don't necessarily have the tools and the state can provide some frameworks for that, I think we should be open to at least the discussion to discuss that further and understand what that's about. So let's talk about accessory dwelling units. So this is actually a really old idea that's sort of new again. In-law apartments, granny flats. If you look, there's been a lot of kind of other things going around Twitter and social media about accessory dwelling units. And if you look at sort of some of the old TV shows like Happy Days, the Fonz lived in the garage next door to gosh, I'm afraid Richie and folks, and and this is old news, right? But it's kind of, we haven't talked about it in a long time. So it could be an apartment over a garage. It could be a detached structure, kind of just a detached garage that gets turned into an apartment. And these are just some of the ideas I have up on the screen here. You can kind of see how that can happen. And it could be sort of new construction, like the top row, or it could just be rethinking interior spaces that already exist. So that's sort of the frame for an accessory dwelling unit. And I think an important point on ADUs is that they really aren't noticeable. We talk about them as hidden housing. You really just don't see them. They're part of the fabric already, and it just creates a few more units in existing single family neighborhoods. And it's really an important opportunity for seniors to think about in particular. It's a really great opportunity to age in place. There's approximately 3.3 million seniors and 400,000 of them in the Hudson Valley living by themselves. So, the opportunity to age in place where we don't have a lot of places to downsize necessarily to or to move to, you could see a few different scenarios where a senior could stay in their home and have an accessory unit that maybe there's a home healthcare worker, maybe there's a family member that can live in the accessory unit, or the senior could downsize and live in the smaller unit, and maybe their family with younger children and grandchildren could live in the primary unit. So it's really provides just more flexibility, also helps folks afford the cost of staying in their homes. So a few different reasons why it's a really important option in particular for our seniors. And just a few examples, just so you can see sort of as not just sort of the illustrations, but also just what that might look like on the ground. So another thing I want to talk about, and this is kind of a newer conversation, I think, which is middle housing. It's those 2 and 3, maybe 4 family homes that we just don't have much of at all, here in our community. And I just picked a couple pictures because it's sort of a little bit of I would say a game, but a game I play when I drive around town, which is if you look at the one in the middle in particular, you see those 2 homes, and one has 2 doors. And one has 1 door. And I just happened to notice it when I was walking down Chatsworth Avenue. And I thought, oh, that's really interesting because those 2 houses look exactly the same to me. But one, allows a little more room for 2 families. One just allows for 1. And then the other images on the top row, those are all, multifamily. The one to the left is 3 family. The one to the right is 2 family. And these are examples from Westchester County and our own community. I also noticed, and I'll just point out on the bottom, and I just mean this as an illustration. I hope nobody's minds that I picked a couple that I just happened to notice around town, but there's also units that I see that I think, oh, those must be 2 or 3 or 4 family. And then I'm like, nope, those are just 1 family homes. I think, when we think about the way different buildings fit into the local community and kind of the opportunity to create more room for more people, I think even within existing structures, those could very easily on the bottom house more families, in a way that is very consistent with the rest of the housing around them. So just getting us thinking a little bit outside the box, that we don't only have to have single family, we could have 2 family, we could have 3, and just create, again, a little more room within the context that we already have to answer this question. Well, aren't we already built out? Well, it depends on how you look at it. Another piece I wanted to just mention quickly, and I want to be mindful of the time so we have time for discussion, is transit-oriented development. Obviously, we're very lucky to have transit stations in our neighborhoods. We have our Mamaroneck station, we have our Larchmont station. Just another thing RPA looked at was the potential to create more homes near transit across the entire region. You'll see where Westchester County measures up that, in fact, some stations, many stations across the region have zoning that does not allow for the type of development that would be considered transit oriented, even though we have the transportation infrastructure. So that's, again, it's just, I think, a miss. We invest in our transportation, but we don't allow the benefit of that to really be realized with the way we use the land around it. And this I want to highlight. I want to be a little careful, 2 things about it, but I just wanted to show surface parking that could be rethought. So the one on the left is Tarrytown, and I want to be careful, and I'm sure Rose can help me out here, that this is not affordable housing. So I just want to be clear about that. There's inclusionary housing. So there is some of that, higher 80% area median income included in the development. It's not necessarily designed for affordable, but I think the point I wanted to make is that it is municipally owned land, and it was parking lots in Tarrytown that are now housing. And when I, drive around and I look at our Mamaroneck station, I see the parking, and that's actually a pre-pandemic picture of the parking lot, that has a lot of those cars in there. I see just a surface parking lot that's owned by the town, to Rose's point, where there's opportunity to think about municipally owned land. And now we have municipally owned land near transit. I think it's an opportunity for us to just think, what we might imagine in the future, and that it doesn't necessarily always, the future will hopefully, in many, many ways, we'll continue to move forward, and we'll continue to try and solve for this problem. This is a real opportunity for us to consider. And lastly, I wanted to just throw out another thing that I've been talking about and thinking about recently. It's not as commonly discussed, I think, as the ADUs and the TOD, but it's strip commercial. We all know that things are changing. We're just not shopping the way that we used to. And so the land that we have, where we had a lot of big box stores in particular, with a ton of parking in front of them, that when I, again, this idea of we're all built out, there's no room, when we look around, like, well, there's a lot of surface parking and there's a lot of single story buildings. And, I would argue within this landscape, there's probably some good municipally owned land as well, that we should think about, is there an opportunity to create affordable housing in this context as well? So kind of as you're all driving down the post road, I hope you'll start to see it a little differently as I do, which is like, seems like there's a lot of land here that we could potentially consider. So I'll just throw those ideas out there, again, all for consideration. And I'll just leave on the last slide that I'm very, very excited to be involved. And I know there's some of my friends and colleagues on this call today too, who are also participating as steering committee members. And I hope our whole community will participate. We are very fortunate to be doing a comprehensive plan. Rose mentioned comprehensive plans earlier, which is an opportunity for our whole community to come together and think about our future. And so it's not only going to be addressing housing, there'll be many other pieces to the plan, but for the folks on this call today, I'd really encourage you to come out and help us think and talk about affordable housing and how we meet affordable housing needs in our community. And there's a whole day's worth of events coming up in a couple of weeks on May 24th. You'll see at 10 o'clock, at 1:30, at 7 at night in different locations, and there's posters all around town. Please come and talk to the consultants, actually, coincidentally or not, from Pace Land Use Law Center, who will be working with us and helping us through these conversations, and to figure out how we put together ideas for the future of at least the town portion of Mamaroneck. So I will stop sharing my slides, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Melissa. That was incredible. The challenge for me was absorbing all the information while my brain was
A lot.
so I'm thankful that it's recorded. So Mitch, what, looking through chat.
Yeah, we have a question from LT regarding the ADUs. Can you briefly address the questions which arise upon transforming a single-family home into one with an ADU? Once zoning is created, a few arise to the mind, but please add these. 1, ownership versus rental issues. 2, permitting processes for ADU to determine the unit revisions, exterior housing, landscaping, etc. Thank you both panelists. This is an extremely useful and informative.
That's a great question. Do you, Melissa? And y'all, and Rose and Melissa, feel free to just jump in together.
Yeah, and I'll cheat a little, and just, there's a lot of pieces to that, and I appreciate it, because I think the point, maybe the broader point is, how do you allow for ADUs while also making sure that they are doing all the things that they need to do with respect to the way they look, and that, the ownership and the rental piece. I guess, so I get the question, owner versus rental issues. I'm guessing the question maybe also has to do with Airbnbs a little bit, to make sure that it's not, that it actually is meeting a specific community need, that it, that the owner, there's an owner living in one part of the home, whether it's the primary unit or the secondary unit. And again, those are things in terms of best practice that for sure, need to be included in local zoning. I think it's just really important that there's enough regulation that we make sure that the things that you mentioned, like the design piece is addressed, that the ownership piece is addressed, and that there's not so much overregulation that it makes it hard to create the unit itself. So I think there's a really important balance. And Rose, I don't know if you want to kind of add what you think maybe sort of the key pieces are, but I think it's important also that we don't overthink it. There's been a lot of great research and work on the best practices that we can pull from when we're looking at our local zoning and coming up with our own regulations for accessory dwelling units. And I guess my hope would be that we would address design and ownership without going so far that we're making it hard for people to create the units.
Just to add to that, I serve on the Tarrytown Housing Housing Committee, and we have been spending the past several months creating an accessory apartment ordinance, which will be recommended to the village. But the issues that that we grapple with and have divergent opinions on, eventually we reach agreement, is dealing with the parking requirements, ownership versus rental. Does the owner have to live there? Because some of the proposals that have been circulated around the country don't necessarily require ownership. For Tarrytown committee, it's an important issue that the owner reside in the unit. And then, where the entrance would be, whether they can be detached. Melissa showed an example of a detached newly constructed unit on a parcel of land. So those are the issues that are discussed. I think they do need to be discussed locally and but not to be administratively cumbersome. And it's the issue who approves one of the main issues we're talking about in Tarrytown, who gives approval to the accessory dwelling unit? Is it the building inspector? Is it the planning board? In some community, it's the zoning board. And how long does that permit last, if it's a permit, and should it last? So there's lots of issues around this. Melissa says that there are best practices, but you need to look deeply into each of those issues to see what's right for your community.
Thank you. I saw one question. Let me go back to it, unless Mitch, you have another one that somebody asked if the 30% is that take home or gross, and that would be for any percentage, I'm assuming. But the question came up: who determines that what the income is if the income is take home or gross, out of which the percentage is figured?
When you're looking at that 30%. Of a person's income to determine whether something is affordable or not to them, it's the gross income that's looked at.
Okay. Thank you for that.
Mhm.
Any other questions? We've got about 8 minutes. Is George Latimer still on? Voila. That's one way to answer that question. Yes, George.
Thank you, Lisa. Excuse me. Wonderful program. I just wanted to mention that in terms of the commitment on affordable housing, our county administration in the 2 prior years allocated $20 million each year for affordable housing, $10 million for new land acquisition, $10 million for infrastructure improvements. And in this budget, we allocated $50 million of capital, 25 for land acquisition, 25 for infrastructure. As Rose Noonan pointed out, money is absolutely essential for these projects to work. And even at that level of commitment, the money goes fast when you're trying to buy some land if you don't already have it in government domain. But it's important to understand that the county has really made a serious commitment, in addition to the report that Melissa referenced, that we're trying very hard to put money directly behind affordable housing development.
Thank you very much. That's very encouraging. So I hope as we, this is so much, I think the reason there are few questions is because the presentations were so very thorough and easy to digest. I'm thankful it's recorded. And I don't know if either one of you all, Melissa or Rose, would be willing to share your presentation. It would be so helpful, because I feel like as conversations go forward, when you talk about the exciting potential of change, there's always fear and worry about, how does it change the dynamic of life as we know it? And that's an important question to be able to ask and find ways to talk about in a healthy listening way. And so the more information we have, definitely including the 2 presentations y'all gave, would be so helpful to stay at the table, because those possibilities are out there. I mean, they're real, and the land's there. And shopping centers, I've always thought about shopping centers where you have commercial on the bottom and resident and community center and residential, and all of that. Just takes a lot of patience and a lot of speaking the truth and with love to each other. And so you all definitely laid that out in a wonderful way. Any other comments, Anne?
Yeah, just a quick comment. That term was used during the discussion, pilot, P-I-L-O-T. That means payment in lieu of taxes. So if a developer ever starts talking about, and you hear the term a pilot, it means that, well, we may want to have an agreement with the municipality that we will pay certain sums of money in lieu of the taxes that you would normally assess. And it is another tool in the toolbox to use for development of properties. And I'd just like to take the opportunity for a pitch for the municipally owned properties around our railway station. Both the town and the village of Larchmont own the sides of the of the train station that they use presently for parking lots. And I should tell you that in about 7 or 8 years ago, we did have a developer come and we went into detail about the potential use of the Larchmont parking lot to put up housing of any type. And I like that idea, and I'm certainly going to continue pushing it through any way I can, because I think it's a terrific opportunity for us to use the property that we own and maybe even get some tax revenue out of it, which would be really terrific. I don't know how much time we have left.
Wait.
Do we?
We do. There are 2 more questions.
More
Oh,
questions.
wonderful.
Yeah.
Can I just jump in with one thought though on that, to your point, Reverend, and what you just said, Anne, about sharing presentations and big ideas like that. And I saw Teresa in the chat and others, that to please think about continuing to participate in conversations like these, continuing to be part of groups like the Mamaroneck Coalition for Affordable Housing, and please join us, because as soon as we start to talk about very particular things in particular places, that's when people get very concerned. And I think it's important that we're sure that we're having, an open dialogue that is, grounded in listening and learning and participation. So it's not just the few folks, but it's the many, who care about this issue that are continuing to be involved and sort of not just coming out kind of once in a while when things get hot, but are kind of at the table the whole way through. And I also saw Nicole had a great question.
That's the one I was going to bring up. Go
okay,
for
great.
it.
Thanks. Go ahead.
No, go for it. Well, the question is, can you address the thinking that if people can't afford to live here, they shouldn't? Can you help our audience see the stories behind the people? So do you want to take that, Melissa? You were going right there.
Go ahead, Melissa.
See me jumping out of my seat to take that one?
Yeah, I did.
No, I mean, I really, I think coming out of the pandemic, especially, it's really, and coming out of Ida and all the volunteerism we saw in our community where everybody wanted to get involved and help, and be there. And this is the long game, right? It's not just showing up with sandwiches, and it's important, and clothes in an emergency, but it's really showing up for this issue for people, because the people who are part of this community, and I said this at the beginning, are not just the people who can afford the homes that we have now. This community is the special place that it is because of all the people here. And those are, the people who don't live here, who you see walking from the train, not to the train sort of pre-pandemic, the people who were in the grocery stores, making sure everybody had food, the folks who were out there through the whole pandemic, making sure the lawn still looked great. I mean, this is the community is everyone. And so I think telling the stories, like Nicole mentioned, and for people who are fortunate enough to be able to afford these homes, to get out there when there's a proposed development and say, yes, we need this. We've talked about this. We want this, so that there's a balance in that conversation. And our elected officials need that support. It's very hard for them, to sit there and take the slings and arrows and not have support from voters saying, no, we need this.
Yeah, thank you for that. There's one more question. It's a big one, so I'm not sure if we can have much conversation around it, but is there anything that can be done about developers who buy buildings that are occupied by low and middle income renters who are then displaced? Anybody want to say anything about that?
I guess
Could you repeat the question, please?
It's a complex issue, and I guess I would think of it from the nuts and bolts perspective. is somehow we got to get in there before the developer who is going to repurpose the property, maybe for a higher income use or another use. I've been in conversations with an organization which is interested in preserving particularly medium-sized and small multifamily properties, because for the very reason that they feel that those properties are being bought up pretty quickly, and they're trying to put together a pot of funds so that they can see different buildings and perhaps intervene by those and convert them into more affordable co-ops is their particular interest. I mean, so if there are properties in your community that you think might be going that way, I mean, you know, give me a call, and I possibly can link you up with this other organization, which is a nonprofit dedicated to trying to preserve affordable housing. I say affordable housing that's, you know, with the lower A, not the capital A.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for that. Well, we are officially at 8:59. So again, thank you all so much for this incredible, like I said, immersion of education. It has been incredibly helpful, and I pray that we keep the conversations going.
Okay. Thank you for having us.
Thanks so much.
Okay. Have a good day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you for the presenters, for the people from our organization that organized all of this. And I hope to see all of you next month. We're actually going to have a June meeting, and it's going to be on the 7th of June. And we're going to hear from our Mamaroneck High School students of the Okra program on their project that they've been working on for 4 years, having to do with, actually related to this, because it has to do with representation of tenants in landlord-tenant disputes. So we hope to see you next month for that presentation too. And thank you again for coming today. Have a good day, everyone.